one of the themes that you guys are hitting on, and I would love to kind of hear your more thoughts about it. It feels like we're definitely hitting like a nostalgia age. It feels like it happens once every 10 years, but like lately it's like have been reminiscing about the 90s. We're seeing this a lot of like people really leaning into remakes. Like I myself are hardcore on the Resident Evil remakes. It's like there's like Snake Eater's coming out. There's so many remakes coming out, and like super excited because that those are the games I grew up in those days, right? And the PlayStation 2 days. Like what do you feel like in terms of like gamer taste now, where people are kind of reaching for nostalgia to kind of recreate these experiences? In my case, I want to share these classic games with my children, like the games that in a lot of ways molded my personality, my thinking, my opinions on video games itself.
Brandon, you touched on something really interesting there with wanting to share it with other people. I think one of the reasons that we work on the IP that we work on, or we're so excited rather to do them, is because we love them. We want to share them with other people. I almost think of it as an act of video game preservation of sorts. It's one thing and it's a great thing to preserve the games as they were and bring them back, so make them playable again for people. So being able to remaster or even present it exactly how it was, there's amazing value in that. But I think the angle that we attack it from is a little bit different, in that we want to rejuvenate it and reinvent it and give it a new life for new generations, so that perhaps when people play Yars Rising, well, maybe they grew up with the original Yars. And of course, as you mentioned, nostalgia, it's such a powerful force. It's really appealing. You're seeing a lot of like Y2K stuff, like stylistically coming back even now. And it's really interesting to see, like, oh, wow, that's kind of circling back again. It's interesting that it's the sort of thing that's connecting with people. But what of those people that have never heard of Yars? Mm-hmm. Well, I think from creating something like Yars Rising, it's our little way of being able to show them the thing that we love, like Yars Revenge. And maybe they'll play this game and they'll go back and research more about the series itself and learn about it. And so it's our way of sharing it with the future generations, to not just represent it as it was and not even to remaster it, but to evolve it and then reinvent it and put our spin on it and make it contemporary and cool and interesting and pop and fun. And maybe many years from now, someone will evolve our Yars Rising. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, you're touching on a very interesting point that I've been seeing and observing, is that maybe it's always been the job of creatives to kind of dig into history and then represent it and make it new again. I feel like lately the youths don't appreciate history as much as I used to back in school. Like, I know my kids learn facts as it's coming, but they're not so as interested as what was happening 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It isn't as interesting as it was, I think, in our generation. And I feel like designers, developers, any type of creatives are constantly kind of reaching back and reminding people, like, we solved these issues before, especially in game development, right? It's like, hey guys,
right,
let's not freak out, right? We've done this before. And in a lot of ways, a lot of modern games, I feel, are kind of missing that element too, where like we have like game loops, recall back, like I think, and this is kind of going off tangent, but just to kind of hit the point, like I felt like the Batman series, right? The game, right?
Yeah.
Was in terms of like big budgeted games, for a while, there was this absence of like completing the arsenals and being able to use that always to the max. Like in Metal Gear, for example, right? You were able to kind of level up be super good. And then the last level is like, let's use all these game design elements that we've been practicing on. And Batman just takes that to another level. It's like Batman 1, Batman 2, yeah, everything you learned in Batman 1, it's still there. You know, you're not having like you're not having amnesia and suddenly you forgot all your Batman moves. And then Batman 3 kind of built on that. I felt like, you know, in this type of generation, there's a lot of games that just forget, you know, the things that I felt like was in every PlayStation 2 game, you know, just building on the elements of the game and just making things cooler and better and kind of calling back. Yeah.
I think that is going to occur naturally to some extent, just over time as games evolve. We have a collective consciousness where some things get lost. But I think the great job of being a designer is we can dig into the archives and we can pull back things and we can represent things in new ways and reintroduce classic sort of concepts. And I think that's one of the things that is probably one of the tenets of Way Forward itself, where we're looking at these classic gaming sensibilities, some of which are like a lost art or lost to the sands of time. And maybe not a lot of people are making that type of game anymore, or just a select few are, making like using those gaming elements anymore, and sort of bringing them into the future. And in our own way, for those people that maybe are not as actively, like you mentioned, digging into history, it's our own way of giving them a history lesson and putting in this contemporary package.
Yeah, I think that's still remains what the biggest strength of games. It's just the interactive ability to educate and to involve, and it still seems to be the main thing that most other industries try to kind of gamify with, right? And it actually has a bad buzzword tone to it because gamify usually means wannabe game developers, but like just takes the intro to it, but never really following through of the core concept of every game designer. I'm sure you see this a lot. I don't know if you have kids, but like you see like these kind of these things in classrooms, right? That they're trying to involve, but like it scares me too that instead of hands-on experience, there's a lot of like iPads now, right? And which is great in its own way. However, you know, with the amount of time that technology just takes over our daily lives, you kind of just miss the just the regular nature walks and how that really feeds into the creativity, right? And this age, it just feels like creatives, unless we get out and really go outside of the bubble, we're kind of, it feels like cannibalistic in a way where we're you know, regurgitating, you know, digital stuff with digital stuff, and it's like it's very rare to kind of see people get outside the bubble and introduce something like brand new and have something to say in this medium.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a little bit of that sort of like pulling from inside. I think the best mix is when you can take outside influences, maybe really unexpected stuff, and fold it into your game along with the conventions. I think the conventions make it more palatable while the outside ideas make it fresh. And if you can find a balance of both of those, you can introduce something really special and impactful. An example I might give is like any sort of hobbies I have outside of games, or any sort of special interest that I have. It's totally ripe for something that can become a part of a game. Like I worked on a game years ago, Vitamin Connection, which I mentioned earlier. And at the time I was really into Japanese Obon festival dancing. And so I thought, oh, this is like a really like fun, unique, interesting thing. And I was thinking, well, like while doing that, like, how would you turn this into a game? How would you incorporate this into a game? And in that game, it became one of the sub game experiences where it's the same sort of rhythm and like the steps and the cycle back to the beginning of the flow of the dance, and the literal sense of like spatial sense of like dancing in a line with other people that Japanese festival dancing has. And I thought, like, what a unusual place to pull influence, but it ended up being one of the more fun parts of the game. And so the reason I bring that up is because that really is just a pure example of, well, it has the DNA of a classic game, like a rhythm game. That's a known concept in the world of games, but pulling some outside influence to kind of keep it fresh and interesting and new and unexpected. I think in Yars Rising, you'll find that there is a lot of classic gaming influence all throughout it. There's a lot of elements people look at it like, oh, that's like that one thing from that one game. Like, yeah, it really is. Um, but we are also taking influence from everything we do in our lives as game designers. And there's some real world things where, sort of hobbies or things I saw on TV. There's an enemy that like is I'll give you an example. It's really specific. It's a weird one, but there's an enemy that's like a scorpion, and we have water areas in the game. And I was reading some article about pool cleaners just like randomly, and how sometimes they'll encounter like scorpions that you have to be careful during the summer because they can stay at the bottom of your swimming pool for hours and they can survive like under the water. And I thought that's terrifying. That should be an enemy in the game. And so we just took the scorpion enemy and we started putting it under the water. And it was a real life thing that had this like influence that carried into like pool cleaners and scorpions. Like, why would you even tie that into the game? But yet it manifested and ended up being something really fun and quirky and interesting about the game, where it's like, oh my God, underwater scorpions now. And it's like, this is terrifying. But anything can be a place where you pull influence from. And that's a prime example.